when the world slept under snow, the north still breathed. The wind tore through the fjord sharp as a blade. Tents shivered. The sea froze at its edge. Inside, a handful of men lay silent beneath fur and fear. No fire, no wood, only breath and will. They didn't fight the cold. They listened to it. Somewhere in that silence, warmth survived. Not from flame, but from knowing how. Tonight we go back 1,000 winters to see how the Vikings slept warm enough to survive the cold. Warmth was never a gift. It was earned. The floor of the north was no friend to man. Cold, damp, unforgiving. It could steal the heat from a sleeping body faster than frost could bite a fingertip. The Vikings knew this. They had no mattresses, no thick hides to cushion the ground. But they had the forest, and the forest had moss. He gathered it quietly, piece by piece, green, soft breathing. It held water when wet, but when dried, it trapped air like 1,000 tiny lungs. He stuffed it into a linen sack, pressed it down, then sealed it between fur and earth. The first layer stopped the cold. The second held the warmth. The third, his body became the fire itself. Outside, the wind scraped across the camp. Inside, the moss sighed under his weight. No fire, no light. Yet warmth crept upward, slow and steady, through the forest blanket he'd made. It wasn't comfort. It was survival. When the snow fell heavy through the night, the moss stayed dry. When the storm screamed, he slept. Not deeply, but long enough to wake alive. And in the morning, frost clung to his beard, but not to his bones. 1,000 years later, we call it insulation. He called it wisdom. He called it home. Warmth, he learned, didn't always come from flame. Sometimes it came from what the earth had already given. He didn't fight the cold. He learned to bend with it. In the north, clothing wasn't fashion. It was armor. The Vikings didn't wear fur to look fierce. They wore it to stay alive. A single hide could block the wind for a while, but not the wet. Snow melted soaked through the leather, and the cold crept in like smoke under a door. So they learned to build their own storm shield out of fur. He took 2 pelts, the outer one coarse and wild fur facing out to deflect the snow to spit back the wind. The inner one, soft and thick fur, turned inward to trap the air, to cradle the heat that his body fought to keep. Between them, a pocket of warmth formed a tiny world of breath and survival. No fire, no magic, no gods, just air. Air warmed by a man's will to live. Outside, the gale howled like a beast. Inside, it was quiet. He could hear the snow hiss on his outer coat, feel the dry warmth blooming beneath. Steam rose with every exhale, faint, ghostly, but his skin stayed dry. Little by little, the body won. Not by fighting the storm, but by learning to live within it. That's what the double fur was, a deal between man and nature. He gave up fire. Nature gave him air. Centuries later, we call it the 3-layer system. They called it survival. Warmth was never invention. It was memory reborn in every cold night. He didn't conquer the frost. He made peace with it. At 30 below, even a Viking trembled, not from fear, but from physics. One man, one body could only hold so much heat before the night stole it away. So they learned something the cold could never teach, that warmth is stronger together. Inside the tent, the air was thin, still heavy with frost. He lay down beside the others, shoulders touched, backs pressed close. 3 and sometimes 5 men, forming a crescent, a quiet wall against the dark. Over them, one great fir, thick worn, smelling of smoke and battle. No words were spoken, only breath, the kind you can see, the kind that hangs in the air like mist over a river. With each exhale, a little heat escaped, but it didn't drift away. It gathered in the hollow between their bodies, spinning a slow storm of invisible warmth. Outside, the wind clawed at the tent. Inside, it softened. The air grew heavy, humid, a strange mercy in a frozen world. Frost melted near their faces, and a faint haze lingered like dawn before dawn. 15 degrees. That's all it took. 15 degrees between life and loss, between waking and never waking again. They didn't fight for space, they fought for heat. And they shared it like brothers. When the night finally broke, their beards were white with ice, but their hearts still beat steady, human alive. The warmth between them wasn't fire. It was trust. It was will. It was the oldest alliance on earth, body to body, breath to breath. Today we'd call it teamwork. They called it survival. And in that circle of men beneath the skin of winter, they found the one thing colder than death and warmer than life: togetherness. They learned that warmth wasn't fire. It was each other. I wonder when was the last time you felt warmth that wasn't from a flame? When the wood ran out, the cold came closer. It crept through walls of pine and skin alike. A fire could keep it back, but a fire could also kill. Smoke filled the tents. Sparks kissed the fur. One mistake and warmth turned to ruin. So they learned to make a quieter flame, one that didn't burn, one that breathed. He stepped outside into the night. The stars hung sharp like nails in the dark sky. By the fire pit, he heated smooth river stones, gray, heavy, clean. The air cracked as frost met flame. Then, when the stones glowed faintly, he rolled them in fat bear seal, whatever the hunt had given that week. The fat hissed, coated, sealed the heat in, like wax over a secret. He placed the stones in a pouch of leather, tied it tight, and carried them back inside. No smoke, no danger, only warmth, quiet, steady, slow as breath. He laid the pouch beside the moss bed. A faint scent of tallow rose soft and animal. The stone radiated low heat, a pulse that matched his own. Not hot, never hot, but alive. It warmed the ground beneath him, the space between his ribs, the silence inside the tent. Hours passed. The fire outside died, but inside the warmth remained. Not enough to cook, not enough to burn, just enough to live. That's what survival looked like. No blaze, no glory, just a stone, a man, and the memory of fire. 1,000 years later, we'd call it a hot water bottle. He called it common sense. The world calls it primitive, but he knew better. The more primitive the tool, the closer it is to the truth. He didn't need a flame to stay alive. He became the flame. The Viking cloak was never just clothing. It was shelter, a moving wall between flesh and frost. When the wind sliced through their hide tents, there was nowhere left to hide. No hearth to stand by, no wooden walls to block the storm. Only cloth and craft. He took his cloak, thick wool, stitched beneath coarse fur. Every thread hand spun heavy with oil and smoke. The outer fur turned outward, braving the snow. The wool inside faced him soft, warm, holding air, like a faithful guard dog at his chest. When night fell, he didn't hang it. He lived inside it. He knelt beside his moss bed, pulled the cloak around his shoulders, and curled into himself, head tucked under the hood knees, drawn tight. The cloak wrapped him whole, sealing out the air, building a small world where his breath ruled the weather. Outside frost, silence, inside a pulse, a rhythm, life. Within minutes, heat gathered, not fierce, not bright, just steady. 10 degrees warmer than death. Enough. He could hear the wind pressing at the tent wall, but it stopped where the cloak began. Wool absorbed the cold, fur reflected it back. A dance of opposites, nature fighting itself for his survival. He slept without fire that night, without fear. And when dawn arrived, his cloak steamed faintly in the first light, like an ember that refused to die. A single cloak, a portable hearth, a man's armor, his blanket, his home. We might call it primitive design, but to him, it was balance between wild and warm weight and wind. Simplicity wasn't poverty. It was precision. He carried his shelter not on his back, but in his understanding. He didn't escape the cold. He wore it and turned it into warmth. Every land had its way of keeping the night at bay. Maybe your grandparents had one too. Most men feared the wind. The Vikings studied it. They watched how it bent the trees, how it carved the snow, how it whispered through the fjords. They didn't curse it, they listened. because in the north wind wasn't just air, it was architecture. It decided who lived and who froze. When the northern gales tore through their camps, tents collapsed, fires died, and warmth vanished into the night. But those who survived learned a quiet secret. You don't fight the wind, you sleep with it. They built their shelters not against the gale, but with it. The tents were tilted mouths turned slightly toward the breeze, just enough for smoke to escape, not enough for cold to crawl in. The edges were weighted with stones, corners pressed low, the canvas breathing like the chest of a sleeping beast. And when night came, he didn't lie in the center. He found the leeward side, the place behind the stone or snowdrift, where the air moved slow. He placed his bedding there, head toward the calm, and let the storm pass over him like a river around a rock. Outside, the wind howled and clawed. Inside, it sighed, softly. He could feel the edges of the tent tremble, but his breath stayed steady. His body heat no longer escaped it, lingered trapped between still air and fur. Even without fire, the air around him stayed 25% warmer than open ground. No struggle, no defiance, just alignment. That's how they lived, not by overpowering nature, but by joining its rhythm. They bent where others broke. They listened where others shouted. To the wind, they weren't enemies. They were companions, travelers on the same road. And that, perhaps, is the heart of every northern lesson, that survival isn't resistance. It's harmony. He didn't fight the wind. He leaned into it. The ground is a thief. Cold, silent, patient, it steals warmth without mercy. Touch it long enough, and it will take everything you have. The Vikings knew that better than anyone. They had seen men fall asleep on bare earth and never rise again. The soil beneath them was not a friend. It was hunger made solid. So they learned to lift themselves from it, not far, just enough. Before nightfall, he gathered what the land could spare: dry leaves, grass, moss, bark, even driftwood, when luck allowed. He laid them down layer by layer, not carelessly, but with intent. 4 inches, then 6, enough to break the touch of the frozen ground, enough to turn earth into ally. The moss cushioned, the grass trapped air, the wood lifted him from the frost's reach, and when the fur came over top, warmth had nowhere to run. It stayed, it waited, it belonged. He lay back and listened the faint rustle beneath him, the creak of his breath, the soft weight of silence. The earth was still there, but different now. Not a predator, a partner. By morning, his back was dry. The frost hadn't crept through. The bed beneath him was as warm as his chest. He had slept on the ground, but not in it. They called it wisdom. We'd call it insulation. Warmth, he learned, didn't just fall from above. It rose from below. And that's how they built everything from homes to ships to their way of life. Strong foundations, quiet warmth, enduring balance. The Vikings didn't conquer the earth. They built upon it, layer by layer, like faith, like time. Maybe warmth was never about heat. Maybe it was about understanding the cold. For the Vikings, sleep wasn't rest. It was survival. No heaters, no spare wood, only first stone moss and trust. Each night, they built warmth from nothing with hands, wit, and faith. They didn't chase comfort, they chased dawn, and they found it. 1,000 years later, we have machines to do what they did with will, but warmth was never in the fire. It was in the knowing, in the patience, in the silence. They didn't fight the cold, they understood it, and that kept them alive.